Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this episode of TheFederal. I'm Naved Anjum, and I'm joined today by a very special guest, Sudha Bhardwaj, an activist, of course, and a human rights lawyer, who has just written a book from Phansi Yard that's based on her own experiences of, experiences in the jail. That's in Pune, and these little observations of prisoners and these little anecdotes that she's written about. Very interesting about the times that we're living in, and also a lot about this discrimination that's maintained within the walls of the prison and how those the fault lines of caste and class they become clear. Welcome to this show, Sudha. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a very important book and also a book that gives you a glimpse into the way things work inside prison and in those brief years that you observe. We'll talk about the book, but of course, let us go back a little in time and talk about your own sort of growing up years. You have had a remarkable life. Of course, there were challenges also, but you have always fought with those challenges and overcome them, and and in the process become a huge inspiration for most of us in India. So, if you could give us a sense of your own, life. I think you were born in Boston, then you came to Delhi, to live with your mother in JNU. And then, of course, subsequently you studied at IIT Kanpur and stuff like that. So I wanted to understand from you, your reading life in those years, if you could talk about that.
Yeah. Well, in that sense, I'd say I've been really very fortunate because I've seen such very diverse. I mean, I've been lucky enough to have seen such very diverse situations. I mean, primary schooling in Britain, a study in a very elite institution like IIT Kanpur, but then also living in the labor camp, living in the Talirajra mines, and now going to jail. Uh, Also practicing law, teaching law at the National University. So
Yes.
it has been a very varied and diverse experience. I mean, few people are lucky enough to have such a diversity in their life, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, so I think um, my my uh, my schooling and all was, of course, because it was a little different because it was in Cambridge in UK,
Yes.
primary schooling. And then after that, my mother came to Delhi, and first for a very brief period she was in the Delhi University, and then she actually set up the Center for Economic Studies and Planning in JNU. So my childhood was spent in the JNU campus, and that was a very exciting phase of that university. It was just being built. There were new departments coming, and there was a lot of enthusiasm among the faculty, among the students, and the whole there was a whole um, energy related to nation building and changing things and so on. And it was an exciting place to be at that time. So I remember in 1977, when first Sanjay Gandhi and then Indira Gandhi lost the elections. I remember I must have been, what, 16. Yeah. So the mashal jalus going around the university. uh, and the entire university, all the students were very strongly against the emergency, and in fact Indira Gandhi had to return, not being allowed to give a speech as the chancellor of the university. So it was a very different kind of place. And I because my mother was, of course, a role model for me. She was a socialist. She was uh, uh, a very brilliant economist, but very simple person.
Mm.
And we had a lot of students coming in all the time. It was a very It was a very democratic household, I would say. And I think I learned a lot from all that. And then when I went to IIT Kanpur, alongside the rigors and the cutthroat competition of the IIT,
Yeah.
I also at that time started associating with workers. So first I started with the mess workers of IIT, and then later on when I came back, construction workers, textile workers. And I think around that was the age when I we heard about Niyogi.
Right.
At that time, he had been arrested under the NSA, and then that was the first time I went to Dalli Rajhara, which was the trade union center where he was
Hmm.
his movement was based. And
Right.
then yeah, that was it. I just totally submerged myself in the trade union movement. It
Right.
is from that actually that I became a lawyer, and later on
Yeah,
a human rights lawyer and so on. Yes.
you're right about that. But
Uh,
I was just curious about, I mean, you of course had the privilege kind of, you came from that privileged background, and there was this bit of idealism also. And
yeah.
I am curious to know that what sort of triggered you to, to choose this path. I mean, you could have very well, done anything else with your life, but you chose to do this, knowing very well that there will be personal costs involved.
Um, Actually, I one thing was, of course, the as I said, the atmosphere in my house and around me in the campus. That was very much very conducive to thinking on the lines of some
Activism.
kind of a social work.
Yeah.
And I think it was really associating with the trade unions in the textile mill and so on, and then later on, of course, with a union as unique as I was lucky in the sense that the Chhattisgarh Mind Shramik Sangh or Chhattisgarh Mukti Morcha is not an ordinary union. It is also a
Right.
very different kind of union,
Hmm.
because not only there were not only would it struggle very hard for economic demands, but there were a lot of other things they were doing: anti-alcohol movement,
Hmm.
running their own schools, running a hospital, doing some kind of research into the local culture, local history. And they were really trying to touch a worker's life in all kinds of ways, not just
Yeah.
by in on struggles of wages and bonus. And that was immensely inspiring. And frankly, Navedji, I think at that time,
Hmm.
for people who wanted to get involved in social activity,
Right.
the option was only to join movements. There were not so many NGOs and all that.
Hmm.
And so either you sort of try to help the movement as a professional, whatever, as a journalist or a lawyer or a teacher, or you just join the movement. That's it. So that's what many of us did in my generation.
Right.
And yeah, if you do it at a young age, it's not hard at all. I
Right.
think it happened very naturally.
Right. Let's talk a bit about those years in Chhattisgarh and the fight, of course, for people there. There were and it was a fight that was very very constant in that sense that and there were corporations to wage battles against, and there were questions about land, on people's land that were taken away
Yeah,
from.
yeah, yeah.
So,
No, I began, of course, as a trade unionist.
yes.
Initially, I had thought that I'll go and teach in the school, but Nyogiji persuaded me that I must get involved in the movement of the contract workers in Bhilai. So that's where we started. So we started with participating in that movement of contract workers, and it was really like a flood,
Mm,
people joining the union. And the events came thick and fast. I mean, as soon as the organization started, there were attacks on the leaders, and then there were efforts to extern Comrade Nyogi also from that district.
mm,
We won that battle in the High Court, and then subsequently he was assassinated.
mm,
And even after that, the movement was going on. There was a rail roko satyagraha. There was a police firing on that. So it was a very tumultuous
mm.
period.
Right.
And after that, uh, about 4,000 workers had been thrown out of 13 different companies, all of which were part of this struggle. And then
Right.
all those cases were referred to the labor and industrial courts. So basically, the whole thing became a legal battle.
Yeah.
And now, because I was a English educated person, I could handle the law. I was the one who was briefing the labor lawyers.
Hmm.
And that is the point at which my comrades in the union said, Abhi, Didi, you anyway, you have to do all this hard work. Why don't you just become a lawyer? So, so that's what I did. So then we were following up the Neogi murder case. There was the police firing inquiry tribunal going on. There were all the labor cases against the dismissals of the workers. And I must say, we got a lot of help from some very senior advocates. I mean, there
Right.
was Indira Jaising, there was Nandita Haksar, there was Vrinda Grover, there was Kamini Jaiswal. Many
Yeah.
of them would come pro bono, and they all became good friends of the movement in those times. And as I did this, when I became a lawyer,
Mhm.
when our cases traveled to the High Court, I also traveled to the High Court. And
Okay.
that is where I found that it's not just the workers, but
Mhm.
everybody who is trying to, there are two kinds of laws. One are the kind of laws which people fight for their rights, like forest rights, or whether it is Manrega, or whether it is these are things which have come out of struggle,
Hmm.
demands of people. They're as a rule badly implemented. You have to struggle to get them implemented.
Hmm.
On the other hand, there are the other kinds of laws, like the status quoist laws, which is law and order, to maintain law and order. So
Hmm.
there you have a whole draconian set of, TADA and POTA and UAPA and what have you. And that, of course, immediately kicks in. So,
Hmm.
if workers haven't been paid their wages for 3 months,
Hmm.
then probably, the law doesn't come to their rescue. But the day they gherav the manager and demand those wages, the
Those
the law
draconian.
and order machinery will immediately come into force, and they'll be put into jail.
Yeah.
So this is what I found when I went to the High Court, that
Mhm.
people who are trying to get the laws which are in their favor implemented are actually also having to resist the attacks which come
Yeah.
on the activists or on the leaders of the movement or the union. So that is when we conceived of this group of lawyers called Janhit.
Hmm.
And we decided that we should support group legal aid. There is a system for an individual legal aid, which is the Legal Services Authority, which is an official system. But there is no concept of helping groups of people.
Yeah.
So actually, that is what we started. And then, as you rightly said, I mean, land acquisition matters against corporates, and there were environmental devastation issues, forest rights issues. So
Hmm.
after some time, that small group had hundreds of cases
Yeah.
against almost every corporate in Chhattisgarh.
Yeah.
So that was happening. And then uh, this is, and by that time, as Janhit also grew,
Hmm.
then the arrest of Binayak Sen came, and
Yeah.
that till then I was a member of PUCL, but not very active. But
Hmm.
after his arrest, then I also started taking up the work of PUCL as a lawyer and of PUCL. And
Hmm.
that is when the issues of the Adivasis, who
Yeah.
are really in this, in the Bastar area, which is uh, affected by left-wing extremism.
Yeah.
The situation of ordinary Adivasis who are
Mhm.
languishing in the jails for years together, or I took up many cases of fake encounters also, where ordinary villagers had been killed in the course of security operations and all that. In fact, one judgment came out while I was in jail.
Oh.
It was a very famous case in a village called Sarkeguda, where
Yes.
number of villagers had been killed. And in fact, the press had been really very brave in that case. I remember Aman Sethi and Ashutosh Bhardwaj of
Yes.
uh, of Hindu and Indian Express had immediately gone down, and they were the first to report that actually these people seem to be all ordinary villagers,
Mhm.
and 8 of them were minors, children. who were all going to school. And that's how a judicial inquiry took place. And so I was one of the lawyers who helped the villagers.
Okay.
And we were vindicated, but by that time I was in jail in Yerawada when this news came. So this
Yeah.
is the kind of work that we were doing in Chhattisgarh. Of course, at the time when I was arrested, I had shifted to Delhi, and I was teaching in the National Law University. So
Mhm.
yeah, that more or less brings me up to date to the
Right.
pre-prison period. Yes.
Right. Then, you write how by the time you studied law and in fact started practicing law, you were 39, and
Mm.
so that was again a whole new beginning in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but also in a way, streamlining things that you were already doing. In fact, as a person, you were handling those legal cases and representing the many of these workers in the court. So it was
Exactly,
only an
exactly.
extension of
Yeah, it was a more rigorous practice of the same thing, and it was like having an in-house lawyer. I mean, there was, and after some time, one became sort of lawyer of all the movements,
yeah.
and like in the jail, I became the lawyer of the prisoners. So
Yeah. Yeah. So,
yeah,
coming to this book, I mean, of course, most of these things that we are talking about is in the book, but this book, which has come out from Juggernaut, from Phansi Yard, My Year with the Women of Yerawada, this is based on your experiences, on observations in Yerawada jail in Pune, and then the remaining leg of that, at Baikula in Mumbai.
yeah,
And if you could give us a sense of, I mean, of course, these are very sensitive things in the sense that you did not have to give out identities of
mm,
prisoners, not names, and yet there is a deep kind of emotional and personal connect with the people you write about.
yeah, yeah,
And considering that these are based on very fleeting observations of their activities, it's really interesting the way you have written and the way you have captured their uh, talk a bit about what was the process of putting
yeah,
them to. I mean, you of course wrote them in the diary, and then you came back after you were released. You came and typed them out. So
yeah, yeah. So actually, yeah, I think I am a person who, like, from a very young age, I've always worked with organizations, with collectives. I mean, from the age of 25, I went to join a trade union.
yes.
And then, so that whole trade union movement, and then joining Janhit, and, so it was always, they were always collective efforts. We were
Hmm.
always, and we were really trying to get justice, to try to improve things for people by some kind of collective effort. And I
Hmm.
think after the sort of initial getting over the initial shock of being in
Hmm.
jail, and
Right.
sort of yeah, finding one's feet a little, um, then
Hmm.
I started just observing the women around. And
Right.
two things struck me. One was, of course, that, I mean, miserable though it was,
Right.
but I was still so much more lucky and privileged than most of these women, because at least I could make some sense of what was happening.
Hmm.
I had good lawyers. I
Hmm.
had my colleagues, my friends, my daughter coming to visit me. I knew that they will be trying their best to help
Right.
me to get me released and so on. And
Hmm.
so many of these women were abandoned by families.
Hmm.
They were, uh, you know, uh, they often didn't understand properly about their cases.
Right.
They might not be able to even understand the language of their charge sheet.
Right.
They didn't know whether, nobody would be coming to meet them. They didn't
Hmm.
have good enough lawyers. The lawyers would be meeting them. So, there was this hopelessness.
Hmm.
And still, in those very difficult circumstances, how
Hmm.
they were surviving, bringing up children, helping each other, managing to keep a brave face. Uh, it was a remarkable thing. And also one could see, jail is a mirror of society. So all
Yes.
those contradictions which one saw outside, I mean, they would be many times magnified,
Hmm.
sharpened over here.
Hmm.
You would see, how all that sort of panned out. And as a lawyer, for me, it was, what does this criminal justice system really mean? And what does it mean to the people who are in the jail? I
Hmm.
mean, do they have hope that they will get justice?
Hmm.
Uh, so I just, and for me, isolation was very difficult. So being in the separate cell of the Phansi Yard. So basically, I would spend my time looking through the bars. Sometimes we were sitting in the corridor of that, cage-like structure, and we would be able to see the ground. At least Yerwada was a rural jail with a lot of space, so there were a lot of trees and ground, and you could see the women eating their food, looking after their children, going to court, or going to mulakat, and from the
Hmm.
back of my cell, I could see the factory where people came to work. So
Hmm.
I would go on watching and observing, and somebody would catch my eye, and then
Hmm.
whatever opportunities I got to interact with that person, I'll interact, and slowly,
Right.
the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle would come together, and I would start thinking about that person and
Hmm.
trying to put myself in her shoes, and uh, then the writing would come naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, it was my way of reaching out to them, I think, with
Hmm.
and yeah, and later on when I came out, I thought maybe this is a way other people can also understand about the
Hmm.
kind of people who are there in the jail. We need to think about them, and we
Right.
and a lot of them actually should not be there at all. Many of
Hmm.
them deserve to be released on bail, deserve to go back to their families. So yeah, so that's how the writing came. I at that time did not, of course, imagine that it would take the shape of a book.
Yeah.
And that
Okay.
was
Okay.
I really didn't think of it that way.
Okay.
But yeah,
But these were notes that you were writing, and there is a very interesting thing you say, that how the passage of time in the prison, that that there is no shape to it, in the sense that there is a it happens on a very routine basis. Everything,
yeah, it's like a
days roll into
grindstone.
months, months into yeah,
Yeah,
years, and so this is more like a grind mill, as you mentioned,
yeah.
and rightly so. So did you, when you set out to give a shape to this book, did you sort of to dividing these chapters, according to the seasons, that seasons change, and that is the only way one notices when one is inside the prison,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. Uh, you see, my diary didn't have any dates. It didn't have any dates or days or times, because these were, as I said, they were, for each sketch it would be gathered over a period of time, and then I would write it. So, um, uh, but yeah, the seasons would make a difference. Yervada is very cold in the winters. We would be sort of shivering, and the hot sun would come, and we would be hoping for a fan,
Hmm.
or there'll be no water, and we have to go and carry water. So these would be the changes. So yeah, so that is how it got divided up like that. Also, it needed some kind of progression, which it was difficult for me to show, because actually there was hardly any progress. I mean, things just seem to be in the same place all the time. So yeah, and actually the initial bits about myself, what I was doing in those periods,
Hmm.
um, were not in my original notes. It's when I came out, and when it started taking the shape of a book, then the idea that which my editor particularly suggested to me, that what were you doing when all this was happening? So that's
Hmm.
how there little passages before the sections. But yeah, what I had written was basically about the other women. So
Hmm. 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 Also, there are bits about literature that you mentioned here and there. You mentioned Bertolt Brecht. You mentioned you also mentioned P.G. Woodhouse, and I wanted to ask you if you can tell us about your literary interests, uh, and especially to write this book, when you thought that you should give a shape of a book to your notes and diaries and your what you jotted down in the prison. If you could talk about that also,
Yeah.
because some of the best books have been written inside the prison, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I can't compare myself with those.
Yeah.
But I've always been very, very fond of reading, and
Mm,
I was always one for, very realistic kind of literature. I've said that
mm,
I love Dickens, for example. And then when I started learning, after coming from the UK, learning Hindi was very difficult for me.
yeah.
But my Hindi teacher was very sensible, and she introduced me to Premchand. And it took no time then. So Premchand was my sort of discovery of the Hindi language. I love literature. I love history. One of the things which I read with great interest was Darimple's book, The Anarchy, which somebody gave to me in the jail.
Mm,
So reading, definitely. I'm reading history, literature, history of the freedom movement. These have always been things greatly of my interest. Um, it was a struggle to get books. Um,
mm,
it took a long court battle to be able to get 5 books every month, and myself and Professor Sen would share the books, and we were not allowed to keep also a lot of books with us. But
mm,
I remember reading some very remarkable. I read Snowden's
right.
autobiography. I read Naomi Klein's book. I read Babu Rao Bagul, who I had not
Mm,
read earlier.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so a lot of classics. I remember Shomadi reading War and Peace. So
mm, mm,
they were yeah. There was a time. I mean, how to spend those nights in isolation, but by reading and writing. So
right.
yeah, and but as I said, the writing of these notes, I really never thought that it would be a book.
Mm,
I'm surprised till today with that it has actually happened.
right.
And I'm really happy to see it in this form.
Mm, mm, mm,
Of course, it's no comparison with prison literature uh, um, has come from the masters. But
right.
yeah, it is my way to let all of you into the prison and to have a look at the women around.
Right. Right. Also, Sudha, tell us about how, ever since you've been released, how have you been spending time? What have you been doing? What is the shape of your days?
Yeah. Well, fortunately for me, a lawyer is an independent intellectual and self-employed. So
Mhm.
I think if I had to depend on somebody to employ me, it would have been very difficult because no university would take a person with a case like this. Though,
Yes.
however, much I enjoyed teaching, that opportunity is
Yeah.
unlikely to come to me again.
Mm,
But yes, I'm happy to say that I've been very I mean, I'm very fortunate to have
mm,
trade unions and lawyers and social activists in Mumbai also supporting. Um, that's how I'm surviving. It is the trade unions which are supporting me. I'm
mm,
doing labor cases, etc.
mm,
I'm also lucky enough to be associated with the senior advocate, uh, with whom I'm able to do some drafting work, etc. So I keep myself busy in more or less the kinds of things which I would have been doing
mm.
otherwise. Of course, I miss Chhattisgarh a lot. It's like being in exile.
Yeah.
But but
You're based in
yeah,
Mumbai
but
now. You live in Bombay now because your
I'm
bail.
yeah. My bail conditions restrict me to
Mm,
Mumbai. Yes,
mm,
yes,
mm. That, those times were different. The times that you began, there was a lot of idealism in the air. That, there was a lot of this, pursuit to change the world, or at least that quest, that sort of, that throbbed in our hearts. That, we are going to make a nation, a better society. But looking at today, the world we are living in today, what gives you hope? that the legal system will change, and that will things will change better for for poor people, especially especially considering that chasm is growing.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
you cite a report which says that the riches of I think, and it's rightly I think title it's called what is it called? It's called the latest report on the
Oxfam.
Oxfam
Yeah,
report of 2023,
yeah,
which is called Survival of the Richest,
yeah,
Survival of the Richest, and actually
yeah,
that
yeah,
the idea that the wealth of the nation is in the hands of a few, a minuscule 5% of people, you know, uh, mostly corporates in this country, and then on the other hand you have this huge swaths of people who have to live with
exactly,
basic without basic sort of amenities. And
exactly,
so what
exactly.
in these times, and I think this is something which is bound to grow as we continue to so-called develop, become
Mm,
much,
mm,
target growth, and and in
yeah,
that quest. So
yeah,
this shape of capitalism today, and its ramifications, of course,
yeah,
on
yeah.
how is it going to sort of have an impact on the social structures, and
No, this is
also in some
something. This
sense.
is something that we have been seeing continuously from uh, in fact, the Bhilai movement of the Chhattisgarh Mukti
Yes.
Morcha was actually, Niyogi ji used to say, it's like swimming against the tide, because the
Yes.
tide was of, liberalization, privatization, globalization. And here were we, fighting with the contract workers that they should be given rights, given dignity, just like the permanent workers of the Bhilai steel plant. So it was really against the tide.
Hmm.
And if you remember, in those early 90s, it was not just Yogi who was assassinated. Safdar
Hmm.
Hashmi was also assassinated. Dr.
Hmm.
Datta Samant was also assassinated.
Yes.
So there was a huge attack on the working class
Hmm.
leaderships. And I think the effect of that we are seeing today. I mean, I saw it in the jail when we could put on the TV for a short while on the news.
Hmm.
Uh, the sight of those migrant workers walking, I think it
Hmm.
is a sight which should never leave our memory,
Oh, yeah.
because it
During the
means
pandemic,
that,
you mean, right?
yes, yes, I
Yeah.
mean,
Hmm.
1 week into the lockdown, people were walking because they
Hmm.
did not have surplus
Yeah.
to survive for more than 1 week. It means that
True.
they had no home, they had no wages, they could not survive. They had,
Yeah.
I mean, people were walking from Mumbai to to Bihar, to UP, to
Yeah.
Chhattisgarh. It was a crazy situation, and that really is the situation of working people at the moment.
Right.
So the concentration of wealth is really beyond our imagination.
Hmm.
But then, uh, why do I have hope? I mean, I have hope because one sees something like the farmers' movement. You
Yeah.
saw a movement of 28 organizations getting together, surviving for 1 year.
Yeah.
I mean, and organizing everybody from the landless laborer in the village to the, to the Adhatya, and to maybe the, NRA sitting in UK or Canada. I mean,
Yeah.
the entire, you could see Punjab society,
Hmm.
and then later on, of course, in Haryana and Western UP as well.
Hmm.
Actually, behind those farmers, you could,
Yeah.
you saw the women driving tractors down. You saw, and you saw that even the contradictions amongst themselves, how they handled them, how they, it's a very hopeful thing.
Right.
That, and this is what I do expect from the working class also. I mean,
Hmm.
they're in a very weakened position today,
Yeah.
but it cannot go on forever. There
Hmm.
must be a time when people, it's like that spring which you keep on pressing and pressing. I mean, sometimes
Hmm.
there has to be sometimes there
Yes.
has to be an assertion from people who feel that their rights are being taken away.
Hmm.
So I'm an optimistic person, and
Hmm.
I do have those hopes, because you see, one thing we must remember, Naveji, there some of
Hmm.
us have a choice. Like
Yeah.
all of you asked me this question: why did you choose to do this, or why did you choose
Yeah.
to do that? But we must remember those people who don't have any choice.
Yeah. True.
They have no choice but to fight.
Yeah.
Either you fight or you die.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, if your basti is being demolished, you fight. If your land is being taken away, you fight.
You fight.
If you're losing your job, you fight.
Yeah.
And what else can you do? What
Yeah.
else can you do?
True. One last
So
question.
that was
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Please conclude. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. No. That's what I wanted to say.
Okay. Okay. So one last question, Sudha, about if you look back in hindsight, of course there have been experiences that would have made you given you a better sense of how things would have turned out differently if you had done it this way or that way. You have, of course, by birth you were an American citizen, and you citizenship that you gave up. And you write a very interesting anecdote that when you went to the embassy, and it took them days to find a form to actually to give up on the citizenship. And I wanted to ask you, if you look back at all these years, and the life that you made for yourself, what do you make of it, and do you have any regrets, and or not at all?
Not at all. Absolutely not at all.
Yeah.
Because I think, I think very early on, I chose which side I was on. That, I was on the side of the workers. I chose that at a very early age. And then everything else followed very naturally.
Yeah.
I think I would have found an American citizenship a burden for me, actually. Because I would every 6 months have to go and report to some foreign regional registration office and tell them what I'm doing. I would have had to take a visa to live in my own country. So it was really, I mean, many people, when they ask me this, they think that it was a sacrifice, but I didn't look upon it at all as such. And I think once you actually go among people, you live with them, the kind of love and respect which you get is worth. It's
Yes.
actually, you can't put a value to it. It's invaluable.
Yeah. That's beautifully said, Sudha. On that note, we would conclude this interview. Thank you so much for talking to us. It was really lovely talking to you, and may you continue to fight many a battle, and be, a beacon of hope for a lot of us in this country. Thank you so much.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.